Hi, Christian. Thank you for joining us today and taking the time to help us learn what's going on in the garment and textile industry. As you know, ground zero for the COVID-19 pandemic has been the textile industry, including spinners. So we know that the ITMF recently put 2 surveys in the field to assess how your members are dealing with the pandemic so far. So what are some of the major takeaways you got from their responses, and were there any surprises in there?
Well, thank you very much, Mike, for having me in the first place. Yes, the textile and the garment industry, and as a matter of fact, actually the entire textile value chain, really from fibers to the fashion industry, really is going through an incredibly tough time. If we had talked 4 weeks ago, people would have said, oh, this is limited to a certain segment of the industry or maybe even to a certain region. But since the middle of March, everybody is realizing that this pandemic is also having a global effect on the whole textile value chain. Our first survey we did was started on the 13th of March, of course, and it lasted for around a week. And it was interesting to observe in this first survey that the replies that were coming in the first 3 days, from the 13th to the 16th, were, of course, from many regions were negative or even badly negative, but not from everywhere. There were still some spots in, especially in Southeast Asia and some other areas where replies were good, where you could observe that companies were sourcing from different areas on short notice because other areas like China were difficult to get a hand on. But as of the 16th of March, really the picture got dire across the globe, and this was especially visible in our second survey we did at the end of March, which could show in the screen if you can. Comparing those 2 surveys, the middle of March and end of March, early April, you see that orders were down in the middle of March by around 10%. By the end of March, early April, it's down by roughly 30%. So, and this is really true for everyone, from spinners to garment manufacturers. And this is true for literally all regions across the globe, from South America to China. From the southeast, if you look at the world, southwest, if you look at the world map, to the northeast, and there are slightly differences between some regions, but really the cotton industry was badly affected, as were the spinners, the weavers, the knitters, and of course also the garment manufacturers, and of course also, which is the final stage of the value chain, also fashion brands and the retailers who suddenly were not able to sell anything, literally, in many places around the world.
So specific on the second survey, I wanted to ask, it showed the second survey you put out that orders in East Asia dropped less than in a lot of other regions, about 20% less than some of the other regions. And one possible explanation of that is that it was the first hit by the virus, and so first in, first out, it's going to be the first to recover. So my question is actually regarding consumer confidence. In the United States and Europe, where I am, we're actually in the middle of this pandemic. We're not coming out of it yet. So if East Asian garment and textile manufacturers start to recover, but their markets are not because we're further behind the curve as far as the outbreak goes, is that going to affect the recovery in East Asia?
Well, of course, anybody who is exporting to the United States or to Europe or later on to Japan and any other major consumer market will suffer. You have to be aware, though, that China is not only exporting their products, the companies over there, but obviously producing for their domestic market. Mm-hmm. Some rule of thumb says that China's production is exported, between 20 to 30%. So the other 80 to 70%, 70 to 80% is actually for the domestic market. So certainly Chinese producers will now look at their domestic market first, which is already picking up. Shops are open again. So it's the first region across the world that is coming out of this crisis and will hopefully, with the support of government measures, recover also relatively quickly. But any company that was exporting to the United States, to Europe, is of course suffering terribly. And for them, there is no escape unless they find a possibility to tap the Chinese market and or to shift production to products that are still in high demand in Europe or the US, like medical textiles.
Okay, excellent. You referred earlier to how hard this has hit the cotton industry. Has the pandemic affected cotton and synthetics differently?
No, I don't think so. This is just a demand shock. Retailers and brands just can't sell anything, whether it's polyester or cotton. But of course, for the cotton industry, it's a much bigger problem, I think, in general, because it's more complex. It's the cotton farmers, it's the cotton ginners, it's of course, and the cotton trade and the spinners, and then the whole value chain. A lot of people are affected, especially in cotton production, and many people are affected, many more than obviously in the polyester industry. So it's a big issue for the cotton industry, for the farmers in India, the farmers in Pakistan, in any big cotton producing country, the ginners, as you could have read, and as you know, obviously, ginners in Pakistan can't gin their cotton anymore. It's a lockdown there. There's no demand for their cotton, obviously, and this has really an effect on the whole cotton industry, and therefore the consequences for the cotton industry are much bigger than for the polyester industry, where comparably fewer people are affected directly or indirectly.
Okay, and eventually we know some places are beginning the recovery now. Eventually we will come out of this pandemic and put it behind us. One of the questions that a lot of people are wondering about is how this is going to affect long-term purchasing decisions. For example, how consumers look at making purchases during times of crisis, of non-essential items, of course, things like new clothes or fashion.
Yes.
What does that mean for brands, retailers, textile? I mean, what does that mean for the entire textile industry if people are reevaluating how they shop for clothing and textiles?
That's a very good question, and obviously very difficult to reply to, because it all depends how we are getting out of this crisis. Nobody knows how long this crisis will last, and what it will look afterwards. The consumer behavior. If it is a very short recession that everybody is now obviously expecting, it's easy to forecast, I think. If it's a V-shape recession, we are having a sharp decline and recover quickly again. People will spend as much money as before. I think there will be no effect. If it's a U-shape recession, where the recession lasts longer and takes longer to recover from, people will probably start behaving differently, saving on unessential products, like fast fashion products, I would assume, more functional textiles. So I would differentiate between, fashion items and functional textile products. Functional textile products will be, in relatively high demand, irrespective. Fashion items that are not essential, whether you buy every 2 or every 6 months, will not change your well-being. But if you need functional textiles, it makes a difference, and you need and want to have those those products. So, we're going to go through this recession, and whether governments can help to mitigate the consequences will have a big effect, of course, on consumer behavior afterwards. If the rescue package, I want to call them, in the US and in Europe and in many other countries, in addition to the help from international financial institutions, are able to really assist both companies and their workforce and employees, the negative impact of this pandemic will be much less, and then consumers probably tend to go back to their normal consumption behavior, at least in terms of purchases. But very difficult to predict, and it really depends of what is happening in the next few weeks. How governments react to the virus. The speed of the change will not depend. How governments react in terms of speed. Definitely in terms of what they do. But if the virus spread is not stopped, and businesses can't go back to normal, then the consequences will be worse than if we have a situation where, I don't know, in a few months we will be back to square one in terms of before the crisis, and start behaving as before. Of course, I think this crisis will also change some behavior in terms of what people are going to demand. I think it's very likely that people will take a closer look at products, where they are from, what they are made of, what functions they have, also in terms of health, healthcare functions and medical functions. There will be a new market, I think, to look at, and anybody in the value chain that is looking at those new emerging markets almost in terms of product markets will have maybe new opportunities that didn't exist before the crisis.
Okay, great. That's all we had to ask. Is there anything you'd like to add, or anything we didn't ask that we should have?
I think it's very important that governments really step in now. I think it's clear that this is a demand shock, and it's no one's responsibility. No company is responsible for this demand shock, and most companies will not be able to survive this crisis without additional support from either governments and or international institutions. We saw that the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank are putting up big programs. The question is how quickly they can deliver on this support. And the necessity is that this is happening very quickly. When we did the survey, we asked always, what are the biggest challenges? And the biggest challenge, next to keeping the workforce healthy, is to have financial liquidity. Liquidity is key for the companies. If they don't get cash, in some cases cash or bank loans, capital available from banks or any source, they will go bankrupt. And it's everybody's responsibility within the value chain to work together with their respective partners, suppliers, customers, to find creative solutions to help each other to survive this crisis together. Because if you don't survive, if you don't have a customer that helps you to survive, and vice versa, you might not have a partner after the crisis because he might be gone. And then if demand picks up, you want to have a customer, a partner, a supplier that is able to buy and is able to supply. So I really hope that both governments support our industry, especially in countries like Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, where textile industry is so important, and many other countries, of course, and that the textile value chain is working together and cooperates and helps each other to overcome this crisis. You know, from the cotton traders to the brands and retailers, from A to Z, everybody has to try to work together, look for dialogue, don't just cancel contracts, you know, on force majeure clauses basis, and really help each other to come out together from this crisis stronger.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for your time today, Christian. Let's do this again once the pandemic is behind us and we're in the recovery, and let's hope that's very soon. Thanks again for your time today.
You're welcome, Mike. Thank you.